listeners, and welcome to the Arrowverse Crossover Crisis Podcast. I'm your host, Ashley, and today we will be reviewing the second half of the Invasion crossover. So we will start with Arrow Invasion Part 2 from Season 5, Episode 8 of Arrow. So in the last episode, we left off on The Flash, and the Arrow team, including Ray and Sarah, were beamed up to the alien ship by the Dominators. And so that's where this episode sort of takes place. But we open this episode with a half-naked Oliver and Laurel getting out of the shower, and he proposes to her, and it's revealed that they will be getting married. And it's easy to see that this clearly is some type of dream version of Oliver's world. And the Arrow cast, Oliver, Sarah, Diggle, Ray, and Thea, begin to have these kind of flashbacks to the real life. So Oliver is living this sort of dream life where his parents are alive and he's getting to marry Laurel and everything seems great. And then Oliver and his father are saved by a Green Arrow character, and Oliver starts to remember that he's the Green Arrow. And of course it turns out that Diggle is the Green Arrow working with Felicity in this dream world, and they encounter each other, and then Diggle starts to remember that the real world also. And in the real world, we get Cisco being introduced to 3 of the Arrow characters. I forget their names already. Again, I don't watch Arrow, so I don't know who these 3 characters are. I think one of them's name was Rory. I think one of them's nickname's Wild Dog and Mr. Terrific or something. They're the tech guy and the guy that shoots things and the religious guy. I don't know these characters. I don't particularly like them. I kind of like the Rory religious Jewish guy. He seems pretty zen. But I really don't like the Wild Dog character, and we'll get into him in a second. But I like Cisco kind of, coming in, being introduced, and, trying to use the vibe powers, figure out where Team Arrow is. And, of course, so that's kind of the subplot of this episode is the real world. And then we kind of jump back to the pseudo-dream world with Oliver and everybody. And this is the 100th episode of Arrow, which is why it focuses heavily on the Arrow cast and this dream world of Oliver. And because of that, we get a few of the past Arrow characters. And there's a good scene where Oliver, Diggle, and Sarah are trying to figure things out, what's really going on, and they end up fighting a Deathstroke character. And that's when they sort of put 2 and 2 together and try to come up with a plan on how to get out of this dream world. And then we kind of flash back to Wild Dog and the other 2 characters going with the Flash and Supergirl to try and get this chip or something from this one-eye eye patch villain lady, supervillain lady. And I love just the way Supergirl comes in, and of course Wild Dog says he doesn't like superheroes and gives this whole speech, and I don't like his character. He does apologize at the end, but I still don't like the character. He's too negative, it's too dark for me. But I do love the Flash and Supergirl kind of tag teaming the eye patch villain. They're like high five each other and to try and take her out. And they end up getting the part, of course, that they need, and that's used to, I think, decode Dominator technology so that they can figure out the location of Oliver and team. And they figure out the location, and they are in space. And we'll come back to that in a second. But the flashbacks of the Team Arrow are very interesting. You have Oliver, it's this whole setup to him getting married with Laurel, the whole wedding setup. You have Sarah being there with Laurel. And I believe at this point on Arrow, Laurel, the character Laurel, has died. So it's kind of like a way to bring back Laurel and a way for, Thea and Oliver and Sarah, just to interact with the Laurel character. And I really like that, they all figure out, hey, we're having these flashback memories, but maybe that's the truth, and this is all just a lie. And there's a really good part where, Oliver talks to Thea, and tells her, hey, this is not real. We need you to come with us. We're going to try and get out of here. And she doesn't want to because obviously, in this world, both of her parents are alive. Oliver's happy. She's happy. Why would they want to leave? And, Thea says to Oliver, maybe this is his reward. And this is a great line that Oliver gives to her. He says something like, I didn't make these sacrifices for a reward. I did it because it was what I thought was right. And I really like that because that's kind of, what that's kind of the morality of a superhero, right? Superheroes don't do things to get a reward. They do things because that's the right thing to do, and that's, at the heart of what makes every superhero, a hero. And so I really like that line from Oliver, and then of course Thea comes around, and then we get this really kind of awesome moment with Team Arrow versus past Arrow villains, Deathstroke, Malcolm Merlin, Damien Dark, and then I think a couple of henchmen type characters. And they all go up against them, and then they, take them out. But it's just a really badass scene that I really like, especially since I don't watch Arrow, but I really like that moment, and it's really nice. And then, of course, they, overtake them, and then, of course, they go to, the tower to try and figure out a way to get out of this dream world. And this is where the episode picks up with the Invasion Dominators stuff. Before, it was mainly just an Arrow episode with a couple scenes of the Flash and Supergirl. But then they discover that they're in the alien spaceship and they don't know how to get out. They get a little spaceship pod to get out of. And of course, they're rescued by the Wave Rider, who got the coordinates from Felicity and team. And I like that Ray kind of starts to figure things out. Like, he remembers the saying that the language the Dominators spoke, and he has Gideon translate it, and he kind of figures that, the 5 of them were taken, not just because they were all characters from Arrow, but also because they were the ones that didn't have really any superpowers. They couldn't fight back, and the Dominators really wanted to search through their minds, basically, and the whole dream thing was kind of just a way to keep them, complacent, while the Dominators look through their minds for information. And so Ray kind of figures everything out, and I like that. It shows, that Ray is pretty competent, even though he doesn't have his Atom suit. And sometimes you forget that Ray is, kind of a genius. So that's a good thing. I did have one question, though, is, the Dominators have them all in this, dream-type world, and then there's, this portal in the tower that if they just walk through the portal, then they wake up from the dream world, and now they're in the real world on the Dominator ship. Why would the Dominators have that portal in the dream world to begin with? Why would they have any type of mechanism where they could escape? That didn't really make any sense to me. But I did like Arrow and everybody figuring things out and escaping. We don't get much Flash and Supergirl in this. We get 2 scenes. But of course they're awesome. And we get some good Cisco in this. We get Science Cisco back, and he's not, hating on Barry in this episode, which is great. So this is a solid episode. Like I said, I haven't seen Arrows, but I feel like for those Arrow fans, this is being the 100th episode. I feel like maybe this was a good episode for the 100th episode of Arrow, because I really enjoy it. It's not my favorite. I still prefer the Flash episode of The Invasion, but this is a solid episode of Arrow. It eventually does tie into the whole Invasion crossover, but it really focuses on what has gone on in Arrow and the Arrow cast, and that's great stuff. So if you're a fan of Arrow, let me know what you think of the 100th episode, and do you like it being a part of the Invasion crossover or not? I really like it. I think this is a solid episode. I really love Oliver in this episode figuring things out, and like I said, I love that speech that he gives to Thea about making sacrifices because it was the right thing to do. That's just great, and that's what makes Oliver such a great hero in this world, and that's why Barry always goes to Oliver for help in these crises. Yeah, so this is a solid episode. I really, we end on sort of a Legends of Tomorrow tease, and so we're going to pick up with the Legends of Tomorrow episode next. So probably my favorite part of this episode is that speech that Oliver gives to Thea. I think it's such a hero motto, and it really makes him such a great hero. And so we're going to move on now into the third part of the Invasion crossover. We're almost finished with the Invasion. So let's move on to the Legends of Tomorrow episode from Season 2, Episode 7, Invasion Part 3. So this episode picks up after Oliver and company get off of the Wave Rider, and it's said briefly that Thea went back home. And they come back, and the president wants to meet with them, but they also decide that they should go back in time to find one of the Dominators to question them. So the team splits up. Cisco and Felicity go with Nate, Mick, and Amaya back in time to the 1950s to try to capture one of the Dominators and get some information out of them. And I love Cisco and Felicity just being so nerdy and just being so excited for time travel. And then of course once they get back into the past, Felicity has all this time sickness, sort of like motion sickness, and they end up stuck on the Wave Rider, which turns out to be useful because then they need to save Nate, Amaya, and Mick later. But I just love that moment of them just like being so excited, and I think they make a couple of like sci-fi references, and I just love, because as somebody who's somewhat of a nerd myself, I just know that feeling of being like so excited and geeking out over something, so that's always a cute thing to see. And then of course Oliver, Barry take Sarah and Ray to go meet with the president, or so they think, and then there's a little scene where Oliver asks Kara to stay behind. And he explains to her basically that he can deal with people, he can deal with metahumans, but aliens is something he's just not ready to kind of accept yet. And so he's not comfortable around Kara, and so he asks her to stay behind. So we don't get too much Supergirl early on, but that's fine. But then they get there, and it turns out they're not meeting with the president, they're meeting with Man in Black character, and he is also the older version of the character that the Legends encounter back in the past, a younger version. And so he knows all about the Dominators, and he basically explains that the Dominators in the past went to Earth to do a reconnaissance mission. They wanted to find out, if there's metahumans and if, anybody on Earth is a threat. And in the past, Dominators left and they never came back. But after Barry did Flashpoint, that's sort of what drew the Dominators back to Earth. That's why they landed in Central City. And so the Man in Black character basically explains that the Dominators just are here for Barry. And they just want Barry, and if they turn Barry over to the Dominators, then the Dominators will go away. And so that's kind of the sort of main plot of this episode. Now, in the past, we have Cisco and Felicity saving Nate, Amaya, and Mick from being captured by the Man in Black. But before they do, Nate gets to sort of communicate with one of the Dominators, basically confirming that they're here to, get rid of metahumans, essentially. Then Cisco and Felicity break them out, but they also go back to save one of the Dominators that the Man in Black was torturing. Now, because of this, Cisco then changes the timeline himself. And as a result, the Dominators obviously come back in the future and want to get rid of the metahumans. So through that experience, Cisco kind of finally realizes, Barry's point of view. He understands, why Barry did what he did. He kind of ends up forgiving Barry, because I really hated everything about Cisco being mad at Barry. And in the beginning of the episode, he has this conversation again. Same conversation again with Felicity about how he's so mad at Barry and about how Barry killed his brother, but not really. So I'm glad we're done with that, and they're back to being friends again. Now, Nate and Amaya, the two newbies on the Legends team. Again, I don't watch Legends, so I'm not very familiar with these characters, but I did notice that Nate kind of looks like Oliver, and some distance shots, I almost thought he was Oliver. I really actually liked Nate. I know Nick Zano from a bunch of other things, and I've never really been big on him as an actor, but I really did kind of like Nate in this episode. I liked his chemistry with Oliver, I liked his chemistry with Cisco, and I thought he did a good job here. I think he can turn into like Steel or something. I think that's like his meta ability. He could like become Steel, which I think was like a villain that we saw like in the first season of The Flash could do the same thing. But Amaya, I don't really know this character. She had, I think, a lot less lines than Nate had. She didn't really have much to do in this episode. She was kind of just, in the scene, but not really doing anything. And I'm not sure what her powers are. So, at one point, she, presses something on her chest, and then a glowing elephant pops up behind her. So, I don't know what her abilities are. I'm not very familiar with this character. So she doesn't really leave a good impression, but she doesn't leave a bad impression. Not at least from this episode. So we'll have to see moving forward. I'll have to try to get a little familiar with who she is. And, Mick is in this episode, and he does a fine job. He's the same old kind of grumpy Mick, And then, of course, he calls Supergirl Skirt again at the end. Nice little callback to the first Flash episode of Invasion. So back in the future, we get a nice little scene where Barry says he's willing to sacrifice himself, hand himself over to the Dominators. It's kind of what Barry does. We're going to see this sort of same decision come up in the upcoming Crisis on Infinite Earths. Barry's always willing to make the sacrifice if it means to save, everybody else. And there's a good scene where everybody, Oliver says, I'm not going to let you do this, and everybody kind of stands up behind him, and they're just like, we're willing to fight with you. And I really like that. And throughout the episode, we also have the subplot of Professor Stein and his daughter, which is kind of a touching story. I assume it's probably better if you watch Legends and you know Professor Stein a little bit more. Remember him a little bit from the first 2 seasons of The Flash, but not very familiar with him. And I forgot about this daughter subplot, and I don't even know if he ends up keeping the daughter. It's hinted that he does. I think in Crisis on Earth X, we don't see the daughter, so I'm not sure if what happens there. But it's kind of a touching story, and Caitlin is just there to help Stein, so we don't get a whole lot of her this episode either. Now, there were a couple of kind of questions that I had throughout this episode. First off, since I don't watch Legends, I'm not sure how the Wave Rider works. Is it like the TARDIS from Doctor Who, and it can just pop up and whatnot into different time and space? It seems to have some sort of cloaking ability. I mean, it's not really explained, and it doesn't really need to, but I was just curious. I'm not really sure how it's supposed to operate and works. Nate and Amaya, who apparently are newbies, they know how to run it, so, and Cisco and Felicity had all these geeky technical questions about it, and Nate's like, I have no idea. So, and I have no idea either. I don't know how the Wave Rider works, but it was just kind of interesting. I do like kind of being on the Wave Rider. It was nice. And also, about the Dominators, they knew that Barry had created a Flashpoint, so that's why they wanted to go and, get rid of Barry. So does that mean the Dominators exist outside of the reality of the Flashpoint then? Because how else would they know? I mean, if they were in the reality, the timeline essentially that Barry, created, then they would have no memory like Cisco and Caitlin have no memory of the life in Flashpoint. So I'm not sure how timelines work. I mean, Professor Stein does say, he can go back and fix his timeline. And isn't that what the whole Legends team does, is fix timelines? So I'm not really sure how Barry's Flashpoint is different from what the Legends do. And also, I don't know how the Dominators know that Barry had Flashpoint. So that was just kind of a question. If anybody has the answers to this, please let me know. But that was kind of a question that I just came up with of how would they know that Barry went back in time and he's a threat because he can change time? It was just interesting. Another thing I noticed was they seem to be in this Star Labs building. That's not the Star Labs from The Flash, but it's some other big, I think it's supposed to reference like the Hall of Justice or something. So we're going to call it that. So they're in this giant Hall of Justice building that on the outside looks like a nice big Hall of Justice with like a little courtyard in front and whatnot. Very CGI. But on the inside, it's clearly just like an airplane hangar. And so I just thought that was, and even at the end, they even have like the airplane hangar doors open. I'm like, where are those doors going on the outside of this CGI facade? So that was something that I thought was a little bit inconsistent of this building. But, it's not a big deal. It just was kind of a bit odd for me. Last question that I had was, Firestorm can transmute objects. He can change the form of objects. He can change objects into something else. He turns the meta bomb into water, which is kind of cool. But it's a skill that I vaguely remember him having. I didn't remember until it came up. I was like, oh yeah, I think he can do that. But I wasn't really sure, and I just don't really remember the Firestorm character and his abilities and how it all came about and stuff. So that was interesting, but, it was kind of a cool way of being able to dispose of this bomb. So I didn't really remember a lot of this episode. I sort of remembered they go back into the 50s, and I sort of vaguely remembered the rooftop battle stuff. But I really enjoyed this episode. I enjoyed like the little moments, just like between Kara and Oliver, and a good moment when Cisco and Nate vibe into the Dominator ship. Cisco makes a joke of, it's either that or I vibe us into space. And Nate's like, well, let's not do that. So that's a good little moment. So there's a lot of good moments throughout this. It's very different from the last episode, the Arrow episode. It's a little more in line with the Flash episode. And again, it really focuses on the Invasion Dominators storyline, which is nice. But I would say my enjoyment of these episodes is probably in chronological order. I love the Flash one most. And then in the middle, I think the Arrow one is solid. And then this one is still really good, but it's definitely, I don't enjoy it, I think, as much as, or appreciate it as much as the other two. maybe partially because I don't watch Legends, I don't know. But there's a lot of good stuff right here at the end, which is nice. So I do love the rooftop battle scene, which I thought is awesome. For some reason, I totally thought that the Rip Hunter character from Legends showed up. I don't know what episode I'm thinking of, but I totally remember Rip Hunter showing up on the Wave Rider above a rooftop building. I have no idea where that comes from. If you know what I'm talking about, please let me know. But I totally thought he showed up here, and he doesn't, so that was a little weird. But I do love Barry kind of like zipping around the rooftop, placing these little devices onto each of the Dominators, which is also another thing that I was like, Professor Stein can make like, I don't know, thousands of these little tiny devices that look like they're like professionally assembly line manufactured. I don't believe it, but whatever. I guess he had Caitlin and his daughter helping him. Anyway, but I do love Barry kind of just like zipping around, and then of course Felicity says, there's more Dominators all over the world, so it's a job for Supergirl. And then Barry's like, oh hey, thanks. And she's like, Supergirl and the Flash, Supergirl and the Flash. So that was a cute little moment. That's also one of the things that makes me like question, like, how fast is Barry? How fast is Kara? They can just go around the world in like under a minute, but then there's times where like Barry, like, I don't know. Anyway, I don't want to go into Flash's variable speeds. But that was a good kind of moment. Although, as much as I do like this battle scene, I wish Sarah was in the fight. Like, I wanted to see her fight more. She did get a great end fight scene against Oliver at the end of the Flash episode, but I wish she was in here a little bit more. I do like all the lines she has. She's a great character. I wanted to see her fight. We could have had, somebody else flying the Wave Rider. Could have been Amaya. So, yeah, I just wish Sarah was there fighting. And, I liked everybody on the rooftop just, doing their thing. There's a cool shot with Diggle shooting Dominators, and they kind of like 007 shoots it like right at the camera, which was kind of cool. Again, I don't know Amaya's powers. There was an elephant at some point. Nate's ability is, I assume he gets like maybe super strength, or I guess if his body's steel, it just hits harder. The impact lands harder maybe on his opponents. And then of course I think he's like bulletproof. It's kind of cool power, but it's also more of just like a real fighting type of ability. Kind of like Luke Cage a little bit. But he's still a cool character, and they do kind of like reference his suit. He says Ray made it for him, and I believe Mick says, he's like a Star-Spangled Banner, which I think is like a Captain America reference, which I enjoyed. I thought that was cool. Speaking of Captain America, Kara at the party calls the team Earth's Mightiest Heroes, which of course is a reference to the Avengers. And I did like the end scene of the party, the president's giving this speech. Although she's saying this speech to the team of heroes, but she's got her back faced towards them, and she's speaking to this press, military audience. So that was a little weird, but it was a good scene. It's nice that their heroics were acknowledged, and I do like this. They sort of have like a little after party, which was cute. There's a great moment between Kara, Oliver, and Barry, and then there's also a really great moment between Sarah and Oliver where they kind of reflect back on everything that's happened to them, which was nice. I mean, I guess if you're an Arrow fan, that's probably something that was really touching for you. So they definitely really hit hard on the Arrow, Team Arrow in this crossover, which was cool. And I love that Cisco makes Kara like a mini breach device so that she can come back, and she will. We'll see her back again. And I believe it comes in handy in the musical episode. I believe that's how it all happens. But anyway, that's another episode of the podcast. Yeah, so I do like Kara interacting with everybody, the team. And of course, at the very end, we get Barry and Oliver having a drink, and that's always kind of nice to see them just like hanging out, and they talk about everything that's happened with them, and they both got a glimpse of like a normal life. Like Oliver had the Dominators' Mind Your Dream version of what his normal life would be like. Barry got to live in the Flashpoint with his parents, and that's his version of a normal life. And so they kind of just reflect on that and how, yeah, their normal life is nice, it's happy, it's sunshine and rainbows, but I also wouldn't rather be doing anything than I'm doing now. So it's kind of nice appreciation for the lives that they have now. And it's also what makes them the heroes that they are now, their past experiences of not having a normal life. And so I really like that scene. And then, of course, they kind of quip about, fighting each other. And Oliver says one of these days he's going to get one up on Barry. So it's a great little scene, and it's a nice ending to the episode. and the whole Invasion crossover. So that's the end of the Legends Invasion Part 3. I really liked that episode. I think it did a great job kind of wrapping up the whole 3-part crossover. So overall, I really do enjoy the Invasion crossover. I think some of the stuff with the Dominators is kind of not great. Like a lot of their CGI is not great. Their motivation is somewhat underdeveloped, or at the very least not explained too well. But I think overall it's a good sort of driving plot that kind of really brings the characters all together. And, there's a lot of great scenes of them just, talking about being heroes. I think Nate gets a good line. He says their powers may do some more harm than good, but this is their chance to prove that they're heroes. So it's a really good crossover that kind of really shows how each of the characters shine as a hero and how they can come together and work. And I think this is, specifically over the Legends crossover 2-parter from last week's episode, this is a good, set up even more. It's a step up from the Legends. The Legends was just the Flash and Arrow, and then this incorporates more characters and also shows how they've grown as heroes as well. And so it definitely really sets the stage for the Crisis on Earth X crossover, where we get all of these characters back, a couple of extra characters, and they really get the chance to prove that they're heroes again. And so I really like the Invasion crossover. It's not my favorite of the crossovers. Well, I like it more than the previous 2 that we've talked about, but it's still, if I had to rank Invasion, Crisis on Earth X, and Elseworlds, it's probably my least favorite of the 3, but I still like it. It's still solid. Let me know your guys' thoughts about the Invasion crossover, about the Legends episode of the Invasion crossover. I think my favorite part is maybe the rooftop scene with Barry kind of just zipping around, everybody fighting the Dominators, and then at one point Supergirl saves Oliver's life, and so he kind of forgives her a little bit. They have like a mutual understanding. That's probably my favorite part, is just seeing everybody fight the Dominator aliens. So that's it for this episode. I've really enjoyed going back and watching the Invasion a lot. I'm really looking forward to watching the next crossover episode, Crisis on Earth X, so stay tuned for that. Again, let me know your thoughts about The Flash, Arrow, Supergirl, Legends of Tomorrow, now Batwoman, and even Black Lightning, and your thoughts about all of the crossover episodes they've done. What's your favorite part? Which is your favorite characters? My favorite character is still probably The Flash and Supergirl, but I'm really starting to enjoy Oliver a lot, and Sarah. So that's it for now, and until next time, I'll catch you in the next crisis. Thank you all for listening. If you want to hear my thoughts on the current episodes of The Flash, Supergirl, and Batwoman, follow me over on the Stardust app at Crashly87, CRASHLIE 87, for my quick thoughts on the latest episodes. For those bookworms out there, be sure to check out my blog, Fantastic Literature, link in the description below, for book reviews, short story reviews, news articles, and general thoughts about the literary industry. Check it out, and if you like the podcast, be sure to follow, like, and share it, and be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments below.